Hello and welcome back to the Simplifiers Podcast, where we take topics either in business or in life and simplify them. Now, my friends, if you have been caught and bitten by the podcast bug, because, well, obviously you're listening to podcasts right now, you probably have thought at one point or another, like, what if I launched a podcast? And I thought, well, this is very meta. I'm totally going to have a conversation with a super smart woman about how to have a podcast on a podcast. And yes, friends, we're going there. My guest today, her name is Emily Prokop, and she has been a podcast producer for 3 years and hosts the trivia podcast, The Story Behind. She's also a podcast editor with ePodcast Productions and has been working with others on their podcast for 6 months full time. I'd like to welcome to the Simplifiers Podcast, Emily Prokop. Hello, Emily.
Hi, thanks for having me, Mary.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. And, you know, I think a lot of people see and listen and go, wow, podcasts are incredible. Like, this is the wave of the future. Side note, spoiler alert, wasn't it like the wave of the future in 2007 when it really came out?
Yeah, like way back when.
But there is
I love their enthusiasm.
Yes, there's such a resurgence right now. And, you know, I should be one to speak. I launched my podcast at the beginning of 2018 myself. So I'm certainly on the train and so glad that I have done it. But, you know, I'd love to take today and really focus in on those who are interested in starting their own podcast. Let's break it down in simple terms for them. How about it?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a great way to go.
So, Emily, before we dive into the details, can you tell us a little bit about your backstory? What got you to this stage where you are now running podcasts for yourself and also editing other people's podcasts full time?
Yeah, I listened to podcasts since 2008, I believe. And it was pretty much when my iPhone got a new purple app on it called Podcasts. And I was like, what is this purple app? And at the time, I was actually going through a divorce and I had just moved into a new apartment and I didn't have cable yet. I had internet and I had my phone. So I had to unpack and I had nothing to listen to. So I pressed that little purple app and I found my first podcast and I was hooked. I couldn't get enough. I was soaking it all in. I was binge listening the way people now binge watch on Netflix.
Yeah.
So I fell in love with them so much because I was learning and it was getting my mind off the stuff that I was going on with in the divorce and everything. And it basically kind of saved my sanity.
Yeah. So what kind of work were you doing prior?
I've always worked. I have a journalism degree, so I've worked with newspapers. At the time, I was working at a newspaper. And then I got a job at a publishing company. And I still always had podcasts. And I always had long commutes. For anyone who has a journalism degree, you're going to be driving a long way to get to wherever your job is. So I would listen to podcasts, and I loved them so much. And then about 3 years later, I had the idea with one of my friends. We were drinking wine, which of course is where all great ideas come from. And we had the idea, you know, we love podcasts so much. We should start one. And my husband, who's a big tech geek, is like, we have the equipment. Spoiler alert, we did not have the equipment, but we thought we did.
Yeah.
We used we used microphones from the game Rock Band.
Okay.
Plugged into the computer.
Yeah.
Sounded awful. And anyone who's been podcasting for a while will probably tell you, if they've never had any experience podcasting before, their first episode is just, after you get to episode 10 or episode 50, you never want to listen to that first podcast ever again. But it's such a great starting point and you get so excited about it. And I still remember editing that first podcast and thinking, this is so great. I love it. It's such a creative outlet for me.
Yeah.
I have kind of no rules. That's one of the things you might see in any article about podcasting. It's the wild, wild west. There are no rules. But I mean, we all know there are some ways to make it better. So while there are no rules, if you do follow a certain set of guidelines, you'll have more success in a way.
Well, let's definitely break all of that down. Now, when you say that the very first podcast that you guys started, is that The Story Behind, or is that a different podcast that you started?
That was a different podcast. It was called The Classy Little Podcast, and I basically made all my mistakes with that podcast because if I say Classy Little Podcast, people are like, "Well, what's that about?" I don't know. And so we drank wine, we ate cheese. That was the classy part, but it was also a history and trivia podcast, which had nothing to do with the title, which I found out was like huge mistake number one.
Interesting.
putting something in your title somewhere that when you tell people, oh, I have a podcast, it's called The Story Behind, people will automatically feel like, oh, great, that's a history podcast. That's clearly able to be deciphered from the title of the show. So made that mistake.
Oh, well, that's a very good point to point out at the beginning here. So the story behind, I've listened to a couple of episodes. You take something interesting from pop culture or an icon, like say, for example, Pez dispensers, and tell the story behind how that thing came to be. Is there anything on your podcast recently where you're like, wow, that was a really good episode. That was really interesting stuff?
Every single episode, and that's pretty much why I started the podcast, is because I would learn about the history behind something. I have ADHD, so that kind of helps make the podcast, is trying to look around my desk when I'm supposed to be working and it's like, like why are paper clips that shape? Like who made paper clips? Who decided that needed to be a thing? And just going down a Google rabbit hole, and I just devour this information, and then I look for people to tell. So at parties, I'm that weird person who will just jump into a conversation if somebody mentions, Pez, and I'll say, oh, let me tell you about the Pez Bandit. And they're like, nope, just making conversation. No thanks.
But, there's somebody out there in the world who really, really appreciates that. And I think that's what's really interesting about podcasts is that, no matter if you're doing it for a business reason, which I'm guessing a lot of my listeners will think about that as a business venture to help expand their reach to their audience. But, there's loads of people that do podcasts just because it's fun, or they're just like, oh my God, my girlfriends and I are hilarious. Let's put us on a microphone and let's see what happens. So does a podcast really only have to be for business, or could it be for one or the other, in your opinion?
It doesn't have to be. And even if you are having a podcast that's just for fun, you're not trying to necessarily sell anything. You can maybe get sponsors that's related to that. Like when I did my show before, the Classy Little Podcast, where we had wine, we actually had wine companies send us wines to try and to tell our audience. And we weren't thinking of making any money off of it. But the thing is, if you're doing a podcast for business, one of the best things you could do is be your own sponsor instead of trying to necessarily go out and find sponsors right away. It's like you want to bring people to your business, and you're probably using that podcast as part of your sales funnel to get people to know, like, and trust you. So it's so important to be able to say at the end, and don't be shy about it, because people who listen to podcasts, they're used to ads, and especially host-read ads, where it's so meaningful to them to hear your voice, not just like, welcome to the commercial for blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. So when you say that, you say specifically when you're just starting out with a business podcast, be your own sponsor. So does that mean kind of like Jenna Kutcher does in the Gold Diggers podcast, where she's like, right, this is me doing a break, and I'm going to tell you about the latest blah, 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 blah is, right?
Exactly. And you know what? If you make it part of the show, and especially in your own voice, you don't have to get all copywriter crazy and try to hit your points and say, are you looking for the next best thing in, coffee or whatever? So, bring that host personality that people tune in and they subscribe because they love listening to you. I mean, that's the main thing, is when people love the host, they could be reading the phone book and people will still listen to them and want to hear their voice. And especially, don't feel weird being salesy. I mean, keep it short because people want that content. The content is the most important thing. But if you're pushing your business, make it clear that they will be working with you, the person that's in their headphones while they're driving and while they're doing dishes. And I think having that connection, that just oral connection, especially with earbuds, that person is right there in your ear all the time. And it's just, you get connected. There are podcast hosts where I'm like, they are my best friends. Never met them in real life.
Well, and I think that's so interesting to me. So I don't know if you know this about me, Emily, but way, way, way back when in my early 20s, I actually worked at a radio station. So I was a radio DJ for a great many years back in the States. And, when you're a radio DJ and you just do the thing, you're sitting in a box, you're talking to yourself in a microphone. You don't even think that there are people listening to you and your voice. But then, I would get reminded when I go out to appearances or whatever, and I'm like, oh, actually, thousands of people are listening to you just forget. Yeah. And I think the same thing applies to podcasts. It's just a different medium, but, people start to recognize your voice, and, this is a form of authentic storytelling. People learn details about you as the host because you might just mention your kids' names, or, that you're a vegetarian, or that you hate so-and-so's kind of, little pet peeves. So, people are building up a story in their mind about you, the person. And again, I mean, like, it's the ultimate know, like, and trust ability that you cannot get with an email. You can't get with, and other aspects. And I think that you're so true about that, right?
Yeah. Even a little bit more with video, for me at least, because with video, yes, I'm seeing the person, but I mean, unless it's like a Facebook Live where you can actually live interact with them, which I think, a podcast is great. And you should also look at the other avenues, especially there are ways to take something like a Facebook Live and repurpose it, take the audio out, turn that into a podcast, have somebody transcribe it, and then use that transcription to write a blog post. I mean, you can do a lot with podcasting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's something really, really strong to it. And I think that to highlight what you said there, podcasts are different because you listen to them when you're on the go. You're washing the dishes, you're walking the dog, you're doing exercise, you're commuting to work, you're in your car, all of that. Whereas in video, when you watch a video, you kind of watch it very passively, and you may have multiple screens open in your browser. So I think podcasts are just really interesting to me. It is a different way of connecting. So if somebody is listening to this and they're like, okay, Mary, that sounds good. Sign me up. I'm launching a podcast, doing the thing. What do you think are the very first 3 things they need to do to launch one? First 3.
The first 3, number 1, absolutely above anything else, is an idea.
Okay.
A lot of people just want to start a podcast, and they may buy all the equipment and sign up for a hosting company. And then they'll go into a Facebook group and say, all right, I'm ready. I have all my equipment. What do you guys think I should podcast about? Ugh. And then there's there's a statistic out there that 50% of podcasts just quit after episode 7.
Really?
Because they really haven't planned ahead. Yeah, they either haven't planned ahead or they didn't realize how much time goes into it. And just one thing to keep in mind, it's a lot of time at first because it's a whole new thing that you have to learn. And I promise as you keep doing it, it'll get shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter, where it becomes, for a lot of my clients who do it for part of their business, their podcast is their favorite part to do. The emails, whatever, going out to conferences, blah. They're like, I love getting behind the mic and talking to people in my podcast. So get that idea, figure out the format. That's another part of that idea, is figure out how you want to do it. If you are comfortable reaching out, getting guests on your show, that's a great time to do it. So figure out your format, figure out if you want to reach out and have guests on your show, or figure out if you're more comfortable doing a solo show, which is more like a blog post that you would normally do where it's you talking to the audience. And trust me, people listen to that. Don't just think that, well, no one just wants to hear me talk for 30 minutes. Yes, they do, actually. I have a preference for more solo podcasts and then a few interviews spliced in. And that's my personal preference. But there are also shows that I listen to that are all interviews. But it depends on the host. If I don't like the host and how they interview and their takeaways and how they present the information to me, I'm not going to listen to it.
Yeah.
So think about that.
That's what we do. We do Tuesdays interview style, and then Fridays are just solo round, very quick, like 5 to 7 minutes, what we call thought of the days. And we consider those, we tag them in Apple Podcasts as bonus episodes. And again, just for our audience to make sure that we're giving something that fits into their busy, busy schedule. So maybe it's like, oh, I only need a spark. I need 7 minutes of Mary, and they can tune into a Friday episode.
Exactly. And that's one of the things I tell people who are wondering about that is, well, decide if you do want to do an interview podcast. I suggest every so often do a solo show too. Let your audience get to know you. They want to get to know you. And let's see. So I think those 3 things: figure out your episode idea, figure out your format, and then number 3, figure out who it will serve. This is really important because if you know who your audience is, I mean, a lot of people want to put out a podcast that's, oh, it's anything and everything. It'll appeal to everyone. The problem with that is if you do an episode about maybe Ginsu knives, I'm not going to tune in because I don't necessarily like that, even though that may be like something cool that I'm talking about this week. But if you niche it down, I mean, the power is in the niche so much. It's like people want to simplify clearly. So they want to go down to exactly what they want. They don't want to waste their time with maybe finding a show, even if they love the host, finding a show that's about everything, but only maybe 2 episodes apply to that person.
Right.
So if you can get an idea of your audience in mind, that'll really help you out. And especially picturing them while you're doing your podcast. I mean, when I do my history podcast, I picture trivia buffs just like me who are probably sitting at pub trivia right now being like, oh, I know this for some really weird reason. And I picture them.
Yeah.
And then I picture them listening to it. And the feedback from my audience that I get is, I listen to your show and then I go to work and I talk about it at the water cooler with my coworker. And I'm like, that's me. You are my people. Come, let's gather.
Yeah. No, that's really smart advice. I mean, I was actually at a workshop in London that Liz Gilbert of Big Magic was putting on. It was a writing workshop, and she said that exact same thing. She said, when you are writing for someone or writing a book, and the same applies for a podcast, think of that one person you're talking to, one specific person that you're talking to, and have him or her in your mind when you relay, because then it becomes truly personal. So don't think, oh, well, this is for women ages 25 to 64 who may like blah, blah, blah. No, just think about one person. Her name is Sally, and she does this, and she is this, and she really, really needs this in her life. And that's the purpose that you serve through your podcast and how you're helping to solve her problems.
Exactly. And
or entertainer.
Yeah, exactly. And when you find that audience and when you find that person, you're going to run into that person that you envision in real life. When you do, treat them like a queen, treat them like a king, ask for their feedback, talk to them. Don't try to be, that's one of the great things about podcasts, especially indie run podcasts, is you have that ability to reach out, talk to your audience and have a conversation, something like having a Facebook group for everyone to talk and make yourself available. There are podcast hosts that are like, oh, I'm too busy to talk to people because they're doing a million other different things. But if you put yourself out there and you get to have those conversations in real life, you'll get more ideas. That goes back to the ideas portion. You'll get more ideas for your show. You'll be able to list listener feedback and your show will morph. When you put out that first episode, it might not be what your show ends up being 10 episodes in or 20 episodes in. You may morph it depending on the audience that you find and what they might like. But again, it's your show. You don't have to do anything you don't want to.
It's so true. If you listen to the very first teaser episode from the Simplifiers podcast, very, very different than actually what, we're putting out now. And it almost makes me want to go back and re-record it, but I know you're not supposed to. So just let it be.
That.
Can you do that?
Yeah,
wow.
You
Maybe
can
we
go back
will.
and do that. Yeah.
So, okay, well, let's recap. So, number 1, have an idea. Number 2, figure out the format. Number 3, figure out who you serve. Now, I want to talk about just briefly the fear of the tech, because I think that is what stops people dead in their tracks. Like, I come to podcasting with a bit of an advantage, just that I've worked in radio for years and years and years before. So audio quality, talking on a microphone, all that's easy for me, but certainly for the regular average Joe, this is scary stuff. So do you have any advice there?
Yeah. First of all, when you Google, you're going to get all types of suggestions and links. And so if you do Google, if you can't reach out to somebody right away and Google's your first and only thing, just check the dates on those. Any articles that come up, check the dates, because a lot of the tech has changed and has evolved. And in a good way, it's gotten easier.
Mm-hmm. So maybe just follow the advice from the last 2 years, if that, or even the last year, do you think?
Even the last year. If you can find something that's, right now we're recording in 2018, if you can find something from this year or the year before, you should be fine. And then, the big thing is talk to somebody else. Reach out to, there are tons of podcast groups to be a part of. There's the She Podcast group. There's Podcasters Hangout. There's Podern Family, tons of groups, and reach out, maybe introduce yourself, find another podcaster. Don't just throw a general question in there because, again, you'll get hundreds of different answers because every podcaster likes to do something just a little bit different. And find somebody who you can connect and kind of be your mentor. Take on a mentor early. It's super easy to find a podcaster who wants to talk. So,
well, I can say without a doubt, when I stumbled upon the She Podcast Facebook group, it was solid gold for me. I mean, I'm part of lots of different Facebook groups that are specifically for podcasters, but I'm telling you, like, this one is amazing. And it's just for women who want to start a podcast. Sorry, guys, find another one. But, that is just, I just think it's such a wealth of great, great advice and so many amazing people that are inside that one. So we'll put the link down in the show notes for you guys to check that out. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I think, can I just say this? And I know this might offend a few people, but I have to tell you, I sometimes find the podcast Facebook groups that are really male dominated there is just this undertone of you're doing it wrong, like you're doing it wrong. Like, oh, you need the blah, blah, blah microphone and you obviously don't understand what you're talking. And it just kind of gets into this like not very nice space. And that maybe I'm stereotyping, but I'm just telling it like I've seen it. That's what's refreshing and nice about the She Podcast Facebook group is that there's none of this, oh, you're doing it wrong, Mary, kind of undertone to things. And that's, do you see that or am I completely off base?
No, I absolutely see it. So much so. And it takes a while to for a woman to prove themselves in the podcasting tech world. So, a lot of the times I don't even comment on things anymore because they'll say, oh, what kind of microphone do you use? What do you like about it? And I'll say, oh, I use the Audio-Technica ATR 2100 and I like it for this reason, this reason, this reason. And then 2 comments down, a guy will say the exact same thing. And I'm like, but I just said that. Like, do you not read?
If you're watching the YouTube video right now, I'm shaking my fist at the world. It's like, ugh. So I don't know what that's about. Well, it's simply because podcasts have been dominated by white men for a very, very long time. And only just recently has the wave of women of color, women of diversity, of all backgrounds that are starting to come into podcasting. And the wave is changing. I think, which is more voices is a good thing. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. And then one of the other things that will come up if you are a female podcaster and you get very popular, I've only gotten one email about this, is for some reason, male podcasters, nobody really criticizes their voice. Women podcasters get a little bit more of that. And that's not to shoo anyone away. It's kind of as a heads up, like, all right, if you do get a 4 or 3-star review, they might say something like, she has vocal fry, where your voice goes down and it kind of Kardashians out, or she has upspeak, where everything sounds like a question. But men do it too. And I don't know why women are the ones that get pointed out for it. So just a heads up, you might get that. And there's no reason to change your voice. If that is your voice, don't try to change it for the microphone. Just be you, because that's what people will connect with. The haters will hate you, but then your fans will just absolutely love you.
And, I think that it doesn't matter what the voice sounds like as long as the content is good, as long as what you are sharing with people is of genuine value to what it is they're looking for. It's all nonsense. Well, I want to remind everybody, because we're not going to go into super, these are the exact microphones you need, all of that. But please do go to Emily's website, that letter E, podcastproductions.com. And there you can download a free podcast launch checklist, which has some details of kind of tech stuff that you need. And could you simply do it if you just wanted to play with a phone and some earbuds?
Yes.
That's the important thing. I think a lot of times we think, oh, I'm going to need thousands upon thousands of dollars or pounds of equipment to get it started. Maybe it's just play first and see if you actually like it. You may not like it.
Yeah. And that's really one of the important things is make sure that you like it before you buy all the equipment. Play around. The headphones that came with the iPhones before they took out the jack. That has an amazing, amazing microphone on it. If you use it for your microphone and plug it into your phone and press voice memo, for example, just to get a feel for talking on a mic and being aware of that mic placement and how your voice might sound at different volumes and pitches, do that. Just play around. Do that when you're, I was about to say driving in the car, but I mean, I don't know, because I talk to myself in the car, but if you can kind of get your voice for a podcast and imagine talking to other people, even though you're not talking to other people, because it's going to be weird when you get behind a mic and think, oh, I'm recording a podcast and there's no one here, so I'm talking to myself.
Yep.
So, But if you can get comfortable with it and you listen back and you're like, you know what, maybe share it with a close friend who wouldn't mind listening. Say, what do you think? Do you think this is something that's worth a podcast? Is this something you would listen to? Or especially if you can find somebody who is your ideal audience and play it for them and say, is this something you need? Is this something that you would like?
Yeah. And I also say this, regardless of if it is for your business or just for fun, my personal belief on having a successful podcast is you have to treat it like a business. I mean, consistency is an incredibly important thing. So if you say that you release episodes on Tuesdays and Fridays, you got to release them on Tuesdays and Fridays. You can't just sort of wiggle and throw them out everywhere. And so on the back end side, you got to be really organized with, making sure that your podcast special guests are filling out their paperwork and signing their release forms and, you're gathering their bio and headshot and like thinking about how you're going to market them afterwards. I mean, do you agree with that methodology or do you think differently there?
No, absolutely. And one of the things is there are people who might not be used to being on a podcast. So the easier you can make it for them as well as your audience to listen. But if you can make it easy for your guests, like how, Mary, you send out reminders and reminder emails. And then, hey, just a reminder, this 2 days, we're going to be recording at this time.
Yeah.
And making sure it's easy because there's a time difference for us that they understand that time difference. So the easier you can make it for them, so it's just click, click, click. Okay, I'm in. Even if you tell your guest, you might want the best sound quality, but at the same time, if they just have earbuds, that's better than maybe a built-in microphone on your computer. And if you can tell them, if you can go to a quiet space like a bedroom or a living room where there's lots of soft things around to absorb the sound instead of recording in their kitchen, for example, or going to a bathroom. I don't know why somebody would do that, but I've heard podcasts that sound like they're in the bathroom because of that whole echo thing.
Yeah. And it's a mess. And this is the thing. So we talked about it earlier, your voice is not as important, in my opinion, as long as the content's good. However, I will preface that and say that if the audio quality on your voice, if you have a crappy microphone or it's super echoey, people bounce off your episode. They're like, I can't do it. It's hurting, make my ears bleed. Do you think that that's a case as well?
Yeah, there are so many podcasts when I first started listening that because I didn't listen to the bigger podcasts, I was kind of okay with a lot of mistakes that happened. And I understood Skype connections were sometimes wonky and I didn't really understand, you can do something like a double ender like Mary and I are doing now where she's recording and I'm also recording my side. So we have 2 clear tracks. But there's so many things out there, like there's Skype recorders, there's Ecamm Skype recorder, new software like Squadcast and Zencaster that can help you record and get the cleanest sound possible. But another thing that's really, really big to keep in mind for your audience is editing. And you don't have to go nuts. Well, I don't know how to edit with setting the EQ or changing the bass levels or what. Just simple edits. If somebody maybe, the doorbell rings and they have to go get it, take that out.
Yes.
There's a lot of podcasts that just keep recording during the whole thing. And I can tell you there was one podcast that I will never listen to again. And it was a meditation podcast. And I was nice and relaxed and he was walking me through it. And then he sneezed right into the microphone. Couldn't believe it. And I was just knocked out of my nice meditation feeling. And I was like, you couldn't edit it out. And I had to email him and I tried to do it really nicely, but I was just off for the rest of the day because of that, just to let him know, you might want to take that out of your meditation podcast.
No, but again, this comes back to it of like the audio part. Like you are in people's ears, and that is a sacred, special place. That sounds really hokey, but it is true. Like you,
yeah.
And then if somebody like all of a sudden the dog barks in the background and it's like really, really loud, it's like, you just want to be like, okay, I'm pressing pause. I'm done with this. F this.
Yeah.
I'm out.
Or when people lose their Skype connection and they just keep recording the hello and you hear the Skype ring and I'm God. Could have just taken it out. I wouldn't have known. It's not live radio. That's the great thing is you can take that stuff out.
Yeah. And, here's my personal and honest belief on this. Like, I know how to edit. I have done sound engineering for years and years and years. But if you can afford it, I highly, highly recommend that you delegate that to somebody who's a professional. You hire somebody who is not you to do the editing for you. And now, Emily, you are an editor. I'm not actually giving a direct pitch over to you, but I'm just saying, like, honestly, that is where I think people fail, is because they do the audio and they record it and then they're doing all the back end paperwork and all the nonsense. And they're like, oh my God, it's the editing too. And it's like you add that on top of yourself. It's a lot of work. You don't realize how much.
Yeah. And I mean, that's kind of how I became an editor was I would be in these Facebook groups and people would be complaining about editing and I would be sitting there being like, well, I must be a unicorn because I love editing.
Yeah. For most people out there in the world, it's this hard stuff because I think also sometimes people just really struggle listening to their own voice back in their ear and they go, oh, I don't want to make it perfect. And so they spend lots of hours on it. So this is just me honestly saying, find somebody else to help you with the editing. Honestly believe that. Yeah. Well, I want to move on. What do you think about this statement? True or false? Do I need to be an extrovert to be a podcaster or to be a great podcaster? True or false?
No, that's, I think, one of my favorite things about podcasting is I talked about before, you're in a room by yourself talking to an audience you don't see. And for introverts like me, I would be like, I'm all over that. That's wonderful. That's great.
Yeah.
Put me in that room.
Yeah.
And I heard a great quote. Somebody said podcasting is an introvert playing an extrovert game because in a way you are speaking to a lot of people and you are in a way interacting with them, but they're not draining your energy the way introverts get drained if they're around a lot of people. Now there is part extrovert happy things like marketing. You do have to talk to other people to market your podcast, especially if it's somebody you might not know. And I'm not saying go out and send cold emails and just DM random people as soon as they friend you on Twitter. Don't do all that. That's kind of icky. But you will get into conversations, especially with other podcasters. And when they learn about your show, they're going to want to learn more about you and what you do with that show. And the other thing is going on other podcasts is a great way to market and also develop those social skills you might need without draining yourself because you're still in your comfort spot. Like Mary's in her office, I'm in my office, and it's not like you're surrounded with a bunch of people. We don't have a live audience right now, but you don't even have to think in the back of your head, well, people are going to listen to it, but they are. And you're going to want to see those stats rise too. So when you look at those stats, I think an introvert kind of has a leg up when they do this, is they see those numbers as people, not just numbers. And that's really, really important for your podcast, is making sure that you always remember that, my numbers aren't that big. I only got 27 listens. It's like, okay, we'll go to Google, type in 27 people, find a photo of 27 people. I will tell you, I've done that and I've looked at the 27 people and I'm like, I wouldn't be able to talk to them. Nope. If they were all standing there right there in a classroom or something like that, wouldn't be able to do it. Nope.
Well, that's a really interesting way of putting it. I never really thought about that. The podcast, that's really tricky. And I will say this, only a few months in with the Simplifiers podcast, we're looking at our stats very regularly. And, there are moments of feeling like, it's not enough. This is such a common theme to anybody. Like, so-and-so's got 5,000 downloads a day. Like, why is it that we're not there yet? And it is a trap when you get into that space of constantly hoping that it was bigger, 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 bigger. But yeah, I think that's a really lovely way to put it and kind of reframe it of the numbers that we have. So share us a couple of ideas that you have now. You've run your podcast, a few podcasts now, and how to really grow your audience. So we've launched it. Everything's up and running. Now, like, talk to us on the expert level. What are some tips or tricks that have been working for you?
Yeah, one of the big things is in your episodes, have that as a call to action to share with your friends. If they might be listening, they're probably listening when they're doing something else, because that's one of the great things about podcasts is most likely you're driving or walking your dog or doing your dishes. But if they get a chance and you can remind them, say, if this episode helped you, share it with a friend, share it on Facebook. Most podcast apps have an option for you to share it. So they could do a quick tweet about it. That's a big thing, is ask your audience, and also make sure that you have your social media set up and stay with the social media where, one, your audience is on, and two, you know pretty well. So a new social media app will come out every month, it seems like, and you might want to jump on that and say, well, that's where everyone will be. Everyone's going to be on, I think it was like Vero a few months ago, and before that was Snapchat, and trying to do all of those will burn you out.
It's exhausting.
So if you find that your audience is on Facebook, come up with a group for them, and have that as your call to action. Like, come join my group, come talk about the episodes more. And the more you put that out there that you would like your audience to share it, I mean, treat them as ambassadors of your show, where they're going to probably see something on the internet that you might not see, of somebody saying, I'm looking for a new podcast. And that's what I'll get. I'm on Twitter as well, and they'll tag me and say, oh, you're looking for a new podcast, you should check out, and they'll at Story Behind Pod. And it's one of the greatest things that if you keep your current audience happy, they are just the best. I mean, they're better marketers because it's word of mouth, which is probably the best marketing, than, say, getting a billboard for your show or paying for a Facebook ad. And this is, you can do those sort of things too. But I mean, this is so genuine. And I would rather take a recommendation from a friend than a Facebook ad for a new podcast.
In this exact moment right here, right now, we should press pause. You should press pause if you're listening and literally do what Emily just said, just for giggles. Like, if you have been loving the Simplifiers podcast, why don't you press the pause button right now and click the share button and then come back. We'll be waiting. We're here. Okay, have you done that? No, really. Like, did you do that? Because we'll wait all day. No, it's really important because, like, we forget. Like, I listen to a ton of podcasts myself, and how often do I actually click the share button and send it to somebody? Not as often as I probably should, but you're absolutely right. Like, it doesn't take that much effort. You click the share button, you send it to one friend. That is my challenge for all of you guys right now that's listening. One friend. It doesn't matter who. And just say, hey, I thought you might like to listen to this podcast and check it out. This is how we really, truly grow. I mean, our numbers have been doubling month after month, which has been incredible. Like, we're keeping at a pace of like going bananas. And that's the way it grows. Anything else that you think is really important for a podcaster to remember?
Make it easy for them. So a lot of the times people learn their podcast app and all they really know how to do is find a podcast and press play. But if you can make it easy for them, maybe in the show notes, you can tell people, most likely in your podcast, you can click on the cover art or you can scroll up to see the show notes. And within those, you put your Facebook group link, your Twitter handle. That's easy for them to click on if you want them to follow you as well on social media. Being able to put that stuff in your show notes and tell them so that they might remember later, because again, they're probably doing something else. Say, check out the show notes. It's easy enough if you're in your podcast app to click on it, or make it easy to find it on your website too. So if you do have the .com for your website, and I like to say keep it the same as your podcast name, because that's how people will know you, is the Simplifiers Podcast. And being able to be like, oh, well, I listened to the Simplifiers Podcast, I'll just put that into Google or add .com at the end. Perfect. And if they can find you, that's great. And having the links to be able to share that as well. So there are a few that you can add as plugins on your website to click to share, click to email, click to tweet. And definitely think of people who would like that podcast, because there are some I'll listen to and I'm like, oh, I don't know if this person listens to podcasts, but I'm still going to send it to them because it's about something that they like.
It's true. And with our business, so we started the Simplifiers way back when, 2003. So we have the URL, thesimplifiers.com. But when we launched the podcast, before we launched it, before we even announced it publicly, we bought the domain, thesimplifierspodcast.com as well, just so that we have it as intellectual property. And then we redirect. So we use that new domain, redirect back to our podcast page on our website. So again, before you tell the world, hey, I'm doing a podcast and it's going to call this, maybe go out and buy the domain name first, just so you've got it. And maybe even go secure the social media handles just so you know that it's out there, and do a little research to make sure that you're not choosing a name that somebody else has already chosen or a major brand already has in their wheelhouse. Yes, 100% agree with that. Yeah. Any other details or things you think would help people grow their audience?
Yeah, you will find Facebook groups where they'll say, maybe share your latest episode and stuff. Make sure you're also interacting in that Facebook group or community instead of just running in, dropping your link and going.
Yeah.
Because especially if I see a friend that is posted, I mean, the way the Facebook algorithm works is if you're friends with somebody, and this doesn't mean go into a group and add everybody as a friend, but go in, interact, ask questions, answer questions, get in those comments, actually start conversations and add to conversations. Then, more people will get to know you. And then when you do drop your link, they're going to see that and they're going to say, oh, I really like what Mary was saying the other day. We had a conversation. I want to listen to her podcast. It's super easy to click on that link and listen. So,
and I should also, a very, very important point. And when you're in a Facebook group and sharing your advice, like, oh, well, we just recently did a giveaway for our podcast. Here's how we did it. Boop, 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 boop. That just shares the knowledge of what you're learning, because everybody's on the same journey as well. Some people are superstar rock stars, 5,000 downloads a day, and some people are just, starting off. And somewhere in the spectrum, they're going to really appreciate your advice. Another top tip that has worked for me personally is in the moments where there's posts that say, hey, share your latest episode or whatever, actually share the URL for your Libsyn player. Plunk that into the Facebook post, and because then they can literally click it and it's immediately pulls up the episode so they can play it. I got that tip from somebody else. Rather than sort of sending them the link to your website or sending their link to iTunes, to Apple Podcasts, because not everybody's an iPhone user and not everybody is going to know when they click on the link that goes to the website and then they have to click another button to press the play. It's like too many steps. It's come back to what you're talking about being super simple. Sometimes I like to put just the Libsyn. Libsyn is the hosting platform, the machine behind your podcast where everything is hosted, to actually click and it's immediate. They can listen to play.
Yeah, if you can make your website easy for people to get a player right on top and then also have those show notes below, absolutely link to your website too, especially if it is part of a business that you want people to look around and say, oh, well, I really like this podcast. But yeah, like you were saying, clicking the podcast player, if people are looking for a podcast to listen to, they may just click on the player, press play, and go do their other stuff online. So that's a good tip.
Mm-hmm. Well, super tips. And I want to kind of wrap up a little bit because there's so much we could talk about. Maybe there is a part 2 to this episode later down the line. But what is maybe one or two common mistakes you see people make when they launch their podcast?
One, again, is not having an idea for it. They want to get behind the mic and they want to talk. And that's fine if you have a friend that you just want to record your conversations with. But if you're trying to use a podcast as part of your business, or maybe turn it into a business, or what I did with my history podcast is it's now being turned into a book and I'm gaining that audience, make sure you have something to talk about. Super, super, super important. And that is a big mistake I see. Another big mistake is coming up with a podcast idea and not really reaching out to other podcasters. you might think they're competition, but they're not.
They're
All
not.
podcasters really they want to help each other, and they want to bring the whole idea of podcasting even more mainstream than it already is. Like the day my mom finally figures out what a podcast is without me trying to go over it the 100th time, that'll be the day I know podcasting's made it, is when she doesn't tell people my daughter works for iPod.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't get it. No, not at all.
But I think it's slowly happening. It's becoming part of pop culture. You're starting to see it in TV shows. You're starting to see references in movies. I mean, it's happening, and I dare say that in the next couple of years, it's going to be really massive to a lot of people. So, Emily, tell us what's maybe one book you're reading right now, or maybe even a blog that's inspiring you, or maybe poking at you and challenging you a bit.
My favorite book, it's Daily Om, Madison Taylor.
Okay.
So that book, it's kind of a bedside book that you can open up to any page and read kind of an anecdote about something that just makes you really mindful of it. So I think it's close to 400 topics, and they're super short, maybe a 3-minute read, just to get your mindset around it. I mean, it has everything from stress, anxiety, to that time of the month for females, to going somewhere, travel, family, and just being able to sit there. It's kind of like a reading meditation for me, because sometimes if I meditate, I fall asleep. But this at least just gets me in that mindful state. It's one of my favorite things to keep on my bedside. It'll put me to sleep. It's also good during the day when I just need that break, and it's hard for me to do that self-care thing. So I just go in, close the door, open up to a random page, or maybe there's a page that I need, and just read that and get that in my mindset, in my subconscious. And I'm like, it just feels so much better.
That's great. Is there any maybe one or two apps or tools that you use specifically with podcasting that help you simplify?
I use Trello to organize my thoughts for episodes. So I do a lot of research for my shows, and having a Trello board, being able to look on my phone or look on the computer, and if I find a link I want to use for research, I can save it for later, because a lot of the times I'm out or I'm watching my son and daughter, and I want to save it, and I worry about emailing it to myself because I'm bad about email. And I worry about copying and pasting and shoving it into a Google Doc. So keeping it in Trello and keeping that organized. I mean, it takes maybe a minute to set up a new Trello board for every episode. So that's kept me super organized and super simple. And also the fact that it's on my phone.
Yeah.
So I have the desktop and it's also on my phone. It just syncs automatically. Oh, it's so nice.
I am a poster child for Trello. I love Trello so much, you guys. And I know you guys have heard me talk about it on previous episodes as well. So I'll put the link down in the show notes for you guys to check out Trello for absolutely free. So, Emily, tell us one person you know kind of in your circle or community that you think we should interview on the Simplifiers podcast, and why?
Her name is Heather Welch. She is from New Zealand. She does the Sunshine and Power Cuts podcast, which it's just one of my favorite podcasts out there, if not my favorite. So she has 2 episodes. First of all, she lives off the grid, and she does a podcast, but not off the grid like no internet. She has internet, but off the grid as in everything is solar powered.
Wow.
So she has 2 types of episodes. She has the Power Cuts episodes where she talks about being off the grid and she'll talk about the weather and how important it is to her. And then the other episodes are Sunshine episodes where she gets more in tune with nature. And her tagline is be empowered by nature. And that's another one of those daily Om things where they're maybe 6 to 10 minutes long and just gives you a minute to breathe and think about things and look out your window and remind you to go outside, which is one of the things, if you work at home, it's very hard to make yourself go outside. Yeah. So she's just phenomenal, and how she simplifies everything with the stress of being solar powered with a kid, worrying about food, worrying about the batteries, but still having, the photos she posts the photos she posts on Instagram, it's just such a nice reminder that there is simple out there and you don't have to go far to get it. You don't have to go into the woods and find yourself on an island or something. She's right in her backyard, just enjoying the sun.
Very cool. She sounds like my kind of girl. I'm a sun baby as well. So gratitude and simplicity in my books, they go hand in hand. What's one thing you're super grateful for right now?
I'm so grateful for my husband. He has just been there from the beginning with podcasting for me, and then everything I've wanted to do, even when I didn't think I could do it. I mean, a year ago, I was getting ready to go back to work after my maternity leave and just crying and saying, I don't want to go back to the 9 to 5. Like, why can't I just edit podcasts for a living? Because that's what I love. And he's sitting there like, why not? Why can't you do it? Yeah, we'll be struggling maybe for a few months, but you should really do it. And it took a year to get that mindset in my head of, yep, this is something I can do. And he was right there the whole time. There's never been an instance where I worried that he didn't think I could do it. And he's watching the kids with me, and he works nights, so it's nice during the day I can work, and then he's taking care of the kids. And so I'm so grateful for my husband.
Shout out to the husbands out there that support us podcasters. Woo! Thank you very much for what you do. Remind everybody to check out Emily's website, epodcastproductions.com. You can also find her online. Facebook is where you hang out the most, right? So facebook.com/epodcastproductions. And you're also on Instagram. So we'll put that link down in the show notes as well if anybody wants to connect with you that way. And just a reminder to you guys, definitely check out the free podcast launch checklist that's on her website. And that is a great place to get started. It's absolutely free, so well worth looking at. Not to mention her podcast, The Story Behind Podcast.com. So have a listen there as well. Emily, I want to acknowledge you real quick. Thank you so much for sharing these details. I mean, I think sometimes we get really excited about podcasting. We think about, I could do this. I could totally do this. And then you get into the whole fold of everything, the tech, the overwhelm. It's all really scary. So thank you so much for what you do to kind of help ease the pain and ease the fear for people out there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if you are not going to get into a podcast, but you are listening to this, you can help out this podcast and share it. Share it.
Please do. Well, I want to end on our final question today. And again, Emily, thank you so much for your time and energy and being here and your wisdom and smarts. So somebody's listening to today's episode and they're thinking, wow, maybe I could do this. Maybe this is possible for me. But they're a little bit scared and they've maybe done a little bit of that Google search and they're like, holy cannoli, there's so much information. What's one thing you could whisper in her ear right now to encourage her?
Take your time. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to be great to start, but you have to start to be great. And that's not even my quote. I wish it were, because it's a wonderful quote. But just start. Take it one step at a time. It might take maybe a week for you to feel comfortable pressing that record button. Enjoy that record button and then get ready to move on at your pace. I'm not saying, well, I have an idea for a podcast. It'll finally launch 3 years from now. Like, take your time, but also push yourself, because it's so much fun to start. And I promise it gets easier every single episode you do it.
Emily, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you.